And awesome. Thank you,
I couldn't
Hayley.
find any enabled video skills that can do that.
Alexa, stop.
That extra participant you never knew you had. So good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us this morning. People have been asking me about the R.I.S.E approach to delivering inclusion and diversity in STEM, and very much in particular for us is around engineering. This sort of realised a long while ago that the way we were tackling inclusion and diversity in STEM needed to have a bit of a shake-up quite a long time ago. So in '99, I was offered a role as secondment to the government office and to run the Women in Science unit. And I was excited when I got through reception, got my security badge and found my corner office on 1 Victoria Street on the ground floor. I could just see people walking busily backwards and forwards. And the doors to the office got opened and it was just, the desk was completely submerged, but beneath these boxes full of videos on how to engage girls through teaching science in a different, globally contextual way. And then I discovered that my predecessor had launched this amazing poster campaign of these 6 role models, and that I needed to send them out to schools across the country. It wasn't quite the role that I had expected, driving forward the UK's plan for women in science. So after a couple of weeks, I went along to my boss and I said, what is it that you'd like me to do? And he just said, well, just keep things ticking along for 6 months, be fine. And I just looked at him, obviously in a particular way, and he sat back in his chair and he said, so Jan, what would you like to do? So I said, well, it seems to me that we need to have a strategic plan. We need to know where we're going and what are the steps we can do to make a difference. And as part of my fact finding, I was visited by a director from the Higher Education Funding Council. And then we were having a coffee and David said to me, Jan, this Women in Science is all a bit of a charade. It's not much to it really, is there? I just got over the shock and disbelief and started digging into examples and thinking about what really were the issues. I said, it's about, this tap, 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 that, some of these little things that keep on pushing you down and backwards, and it makes it harder and harder and harder to keep moving forwards. And so I started looking at where the gaps were and commissioning pieces of research. And then after that, I've done my own research. But I still think, following some work that I did in 2010, 2011, when I was doing some work with UCL in the engineering faculty around inclusion in undergraduate engineering courses, and that there was something else that was different. And this is when we started with a huge wave of unconscious bias training. And something didn't really chime with the impact that was having. So that's where was the foundations really of the R.I.S.E approach to inclusion. So join me this morning in exploring the rationale behind it, but also what it means for you. So this webinar is for you if you want to grow belonging on your undergraduate, postgraduate courses, or in your team at work consistently. It's for you if you're frustrated because nothing seems to be working, we're stuck. And it's for you if you're committed to making a difference and want a system that's going to create shift in how you're operating in your business or in your course, or having impact and leverage with your colleagues. By the end of the session, I want you to have an understanding of why we have an awarding gap and why we're tackling it wrong, 4 steps that you must take to make a difference, why we don't need to worry too much about this 16% of women in engineering on undergraduate courses. It's not the sort of be all and end all to keep using a battering ram to solve it, and to give you some direction about how we can help you take a new approach. So, and a little bit of housekeeping. I'm planning to be talking with you for about 40 minutes and just, get rid of those notifications and distractions. We do want you to engage and be active. Do take some notes and stay until the end. And then let's look at the actions that you can take to make a difference. And then we've got a downloadable gift that we're going to send you afterwards. And there'll be time for questions. So why this webinar and why now? And it is the culmination of research and efforts over 20 years to understand and build a better balance, a better approach to getting inclusion in STEM, so that we really are leveraging all of the talents in the workforce. And it's about helping us understand how we connect with people and how we focus on what people do well, rather than doing more things and more things, but making sure that the things that we do well, we're doing them better, whether that's designing engineering solutions, or whether it's about understanding how we can engage with our team and everybody to be better. And it's about getting better balance in STEM subjects in the workforce, but ultimately it's around helping us to create a space where people are able to be their best. We can ebb and flow in the concentration and energies that we're giving, but ultimately everybody is able to do that. My frustration has increased over the last few years, but just before the pandemic, we launched the Conversations for Inclusion programme, and it kind of got a bit derailed. And so we're really focusing on understanding how we can flip away from focusing on fixing the minoritized and marginalized people in science and engineering. There's nothing wrong with them. We need to understand how we can leverage the impact of the diversity sector going forward. Because, it's really quite shocking to me that there's £8 billion is spent on diversity training, and that's set to double over the next 3 years. Absolutely horrifying. So that's a real driver. What is it we can do better? We don't need to just train people, and unconscious bias training doesn't really feel right to me. And when I started exploring with people in universities and industry about where they were going with unconscious bias training and what they were following it up with, I was fascinated when there's a few people said to me the same thing. And this was like, the thing is, Jan, and then they would proceed to say things like, well, engineers don't need help. This is just another problem. And that's what we engineers do. We fix problems. We don't need to be told what to do. Another senior, well, this has been from more than one, and this is but one very particular senior engineering academic said to me, well, we've done the unconscious bias training. It started with the thing is, Jan, we've done the unconscious bias training. Nothing's changed. We have no idea what to do next. Another one said, the thing is, Jan, diversity is just political correctness gone mad. I don't know if you've ever heard anybody say that. But hopefully, I'm really hopeful that it's like less and less people making that kind of comment these days, because it totally is not about political correctness gone mad. And then somebody else, I was in this group coaching program about 4 years ago, and I had a call in a breakout group with this guy, and this guy said to me, he said, the thing is, Jan, we white male engineers, we feel marginalised and excluded. We don't know what we can do to contribute. And I was like, oh, okay. He said the problem was, he said that every time he wants to go for promotion or he's looking to get some help and support, none of the programs of help and support, the reading groups, the writing groups, they aren't targeted at white male engineers. And every time he goes for a job or a promotion, he sees greater and greater competition. He sees opportunities for minoritized and marginalized engineers to get support, coaching, mentoring before they even get to the interview, and in many cases being provided by the organizations. He said he's feeling really devalued, really unwanted. He said, I don't feel valued. And then someone else said, I just feel criticized. Unconscious bias training, I'm wrong, I'm flawed, I'm not going to fix it, there needs to be something else that I need to do. And it makes them feel as though they're responsible for the situation. But of course, blaming people doesn't really solve the problem in the first place. And the reality is that there are still problems, that there is an awarding gap still, and it's persisting. In some universities, I've heard, they have managed to close it, but it varies massively. 38.9%, this is Advanced HE report from 2021, of white students are getting a first-class degree compared to 28.6% of Black, Asian and minority ethnic students. And that varies depending on people's ethnic background. Insane. Women in engineering, it's still stuck at 16%. Somebody said to me the other day, that's been stuck there for around 5 to 10 years. But actually, the reality is, I can tell you categorically, it's been stuck there since the 1990s, and that's the mid 1990s. Back in 1984, it was 7%. It had gone up from about 1% in the 70s. But it then got stuck, and this is data that came through the R.I.S.E campaign that I was doing some work with at the time. It got to 15%, and then it's oscillated. It did dip down to 13.5%, but it's around 6%, 16%. And there it is pretty much stuck. We have more women going into engineering, greater diversity in terms of ethnic diversity of women going into engineering, but fundamentally it's still stuck in the mid-teens. And one of the challenges, I hear people want to get to 30% by 2030. Now, I'm not saying that we shouldn't be bringing more women in and engaging and inspiring women to come into engineering, but we need to not get hung up on the actual number. What we need to be focusing on is making sure that every single individual that is in engineering is able to be their best, be happy, be valued, and feel like they belong in this amazing profession. Been doing some work over the last year with Helen, looking with the Warwick Manufacturing Group, looking at early career researchers in engineering and their well-being and mental health. And it's quite stark to see the issues that engineering is facing. And there's somebody's just about to finish doing a PhD at Robert Gordon University, and she was driven to do the PhD because she saw few people from engineering departments coming forward asking for help. And engineers and men typically don't ask for help when they're feeling like they can't manage and can't cope, and their well-being is challenged. And the big thing in engineering then is people aren't getting help until it's really late, in which case it's becoming life-changing, life-threatening even situation that didn't need to get to be that bad. And the other challenge is that engineering isn't the same place that it was 100 years ago. Engineers need to have a global sense of responsibility. We need engineers who are understanding where we sit in the context of the challenges of getting resources, about where the impact on people and the communities where we're taking resources from, where manufacturing is being set up, but also the end of life of products. But also engineering that can help alleviate some of the really big global challenges that we face. So why is it that we're struggling to realize that there are things that we need to do? There is so much noise and stuff going on in the world that we filter things out. And we have to filter things out that can help us to make the decisions that we need to make. But if we're not aware of the decisions and why we've filtered so much information out, we suffer from inattentional blindness. Go and have a look at the Horizon programme with Daniel Kahneman that the BBC did in 2015, which shows lots of evidence about how we can become, our thinking is obfuscated. Kahneman's research was triggered by the 2008 stock market crash, when he was asking, why were these people in Wall Street failing to notice what was going on around the place? And he was really surprised at it. And it was because they became so comfortable in the way that they thought things were. He did all sorts of experiments with people in New York and in London, looking at how we can become confused and how our thinking can become incredibly limited. And so this inattentional blindness is something we need to be aware of, but we need to just understand how our thinking and our brains can be so lazy that we can become blind to the obvious. That we need to appreciate that when we see things, we believe them, but sometimes not quite true. I'm sure you've seen this optical illusion, which gives you a clue really, doesn't it? So is square A the same colour as square B? And our first intuitive, our brain's going, yes, no, not at all, we can tell they're completely different colours. And so, but if we then match the two colours up, we can see that our brain is thinking ahead of ourselves and saying, well, of course then they're the same, but we're seeing the shadow, and that's confusing the brain around what is really happening. Other ways that we make errors in our judgment, that it's just good, isn't it, that people who are tall are so much better at leading big organizations. If we look at, there's lots of data now on the height of world leaders, both in government and in Fortune 500 companies, for example. In the American Fortune 500 companies, 58% of the CEOs are over 6 foot tall, compared to 14.5% of men in the American general population. 30% of American presidents are over 6 foot 2 tall. Very few world leaders are on the short side. And of course, we're very familiar from all of the electioneering over the last few years that if we repeat a lie often enough, we start believing that it's true. And the tabloid red top newspapers are as responsible for that as any, putting crazy headlines in there and bombarding us repeatedly over the years. So all of this led me to write my manifesto for a people-centered engineering education. How can we stop criticizing engineers about being flawed, about having an unconscious bias, inattentional blindness, about the fact that excellence in engineering really wasn't taking place? So were two ways that I put the manifesto diagram. One is in this sort of like virtuous circle with excellent teaching, creating a safe place to work and learn, fostering belonging, building esteem and confidence that leads to innovation through diversity. But the other one that can really sort of like maps onto the Maslow's hierarchy of needs and fundamental for engineers is about excellence, the meritocracy, and helping people to connect with why we've designed products in the past that are flawed and can damage people. And of course, the obvious one to think about is the seatbelt for pregnant women. The data showing that the biggest reason for fetal harm in car accidents was the seatbelt has been there for a long, long time, but it's taken a lot of campaigning over the last 20 years. Before there was even in 1999, there was a model for looking at seatbelts, and then there was finally recently a crash test dummy that really helped to model it. So the mission here is to shift that the narrative around diversity and inclusion in engineering from one that was around you must do inclusion, you must be inclusive, to framing it so why wouldn't you? And from that arose the R.I.S.E approach. It was our signature methodology that wants everybody to rise together. It's not about putting one individual group down compared to any other. And the R.I.S.E acronym stands for rationalize, internalize, strategize, and energize or externalize. It's around, the R is around helping people to know why inclusion is relevant to them. And the only way people can do that is by looking at things that haven't worked in the past, about seeing how it impacts on people and going, oh, and it's really that light bulb moment. Oh, this is what we mean. And these are the things that we can do to make a difference. So it's about making it relevant to people, because if it's not relevant, nobody will do anything about it. And we can have initiative after initiative. It's not going to make one blind bit of difference. It will just be blocked. It's not relevant to me. I'm going to carry on doing what I am doing. I've been trained in an approach and a methodology, and I need to do it though. The second phase is once you realise, excuse me, once you've made that breakthrough about the connection between inclusion, diversity and engineering and what you can do about it, is to think about, well, what can I do for myself? Excuse me. And the internalized piece is appreciating what are the things that you can do. Because of course, there's lots of things that you can do, but it's around having very specific, actionable, small things that you can do in your everyday life. Whether it's going into a meeting and acknowledging individuals, inviting people to speak by their name every time you invite a contribution if you're in the chair, acknowledging the person who spoke before you and say, thank you very much for your contribution. I was interested in it because, acknowledging and bringing and valuing so that they are noticed and feel like an important part of the conversation. Just one tiny thing that could be done. But it goes much deeper in terms of the actions that you can take. It sets you on a road of a journey of noticing, about listening to other people and to observing the kinds of activities that you can do. And it keeps you curious and asks better, deeper questions of people. And by the very act of that is around being able to be connected and really understand somebody else's perspective. So the internalizing piece is around realizing that you have an agency to actually do something. And it's about taking your focus away from yourself and thinking, I'm just technical, I'm just doing this because it's important to solve the problem in front of me. It's helping you on that road to really making a difference. So the third step is to strategize. There are so many things that you could do, that all of us could do to make a difference. It's beyond going on a training course. It's around thinking around where you could do, if you're in a higher education or further education, knowing about where you teach, thinking about what you teach, thinking how you teach to connect with other people. But then also, where are the opportunities for professional practice? So it's a 4-pillar framework around understanding how you can take a systematic and targeted, measured approach that will reap rewards. And then if you're in a private sector organisation, how do you go around strategizing? So we use the ISO 40315/2021, which is the ISO for diversity and inclusion. And it provides, with the inclusion score platform, it really gives you that sense of what are the many things you can do. And in engineering and the built environment, it's about supplier diversity. It's about the products and services that you're designing that can make a difference and make them more useful to people and save money in the long term, as they're not having to be redesigned for different people. So how do we help people to move through that process? So to rationalize the different approach is to think through how the environments that we're designing and building, the cultural artifacts that we can think about, that we can use, but also looking into engineering in terms of the errors in the past. Now, of course, there's an amazing book that Caroline Criado-Perez wrote, which is Invisible Women, and it's full of wonderful examples. But there's the Gendered Innovations website that is documented with a lot of methodological research that helps provide information about how errors have been made in fundamental science and engineering thinking and doing that have caused harm in the past. And so there's lots of places that can go. So we run workshops that help people to think it through in a non-confrontational way with, here are some examples. How have these become flawed? How can you think about what you do in your role, how you can make a difference as a colleague, as a teacher, as a mentor, as an educator, as a fixer of problems and solver and designer of solutions. So lots of different ways that people can think about, just stop and pause and have a think in a more systematic and rigorous way around what it is that they can do and what is relevant to themselves. So the second step, internalize, what can you do to make a difference? So it's around noticing what we do as an individual, how we behave, and how we can look at things from a more practical level. So it's around, and it's very much, it is multi-dimensional. It's your role as a scientist or engineer in terms of designing strategies. It's also about how you work and interact with your colleagues, as much as thinking in that global context, and more about that in a moment. So I want you to think about the person who's stopping those dominoes just falling over in the kind of way that they're going to do. It's about doing, hey, let's think about this. I'm going to stop that. I'm going to make a difference. I'm going to be that disruptor in however small or bigger way you want to be. So I mentioned strategizing. So in higher education, we've got the engineering health check tool, and it's got 4 pillars with 92 statements, which is very outcome focused, which allows you to look through and think about how in terms of curriculum development and leadership, you can make a difference. Where are you now in your course or in your department or school? What do you do in terms of curricular review? Do you look at the different aspects of inclusion and what you could do for that? What tools have you got access to? What's the general level of awareness? Is it just in those that are interested, who've connected with the relevance? Is it just people who are drawn from a marginalized or minoritized group within that team that are connected with making a difference? So they might be a small or a lone voice. Is there a systematic approach for every review? Do you have a checklist to go through to make a difference? What's the infrastructure supporting it? What are the skills that people have? And to what level of co-creation with anybody and everybody in the department, students included, are you learning from people from different backgrounds? So it's being able to strategize and targeting what it is you do so that your plan is not let's try and do everything at once. Let's be targeted and specific. And let's work out which steps we want to make. What are we doing really well at? Let's share and celebrate that. But what are the things where we've got the biggest gap? Which ones really aren't relevant? And it's always really interesting in workshops to have different departments where one department will go, well, it's not relevant to us, we're just technical. And another department will look at them in disbelief and say, oh, come on, really? We teach people about the demographic size of the population when we're designing, constructing a new factory. This was a chemical engineer. When they couldn't believe that in electronics, it doesn't matter the size of general populations. We're just technical designing equipment. When of course we all know that the size of buttons and the reach for control desks and panels is really, really important. So I mentioned the inclusion score platform that we use, which is around creating an intentional journey to inclusion across the 32 different diversity and inclusion domains and 27 diversity types, and then 4 kinds of project types that we typically use to leverage change within diversity and inclusion, whether it's about training or inclusive design. So the inclusion score platform gives you this sort of radar of managing and monitoring change. And what is it that we can do then to externalize change? How can we, it's around taking your own appreciation of what you could do and talking around it, sharing it, energizing others, connecting with people in different departments or different organizations to share the value that you bring, but also to share the reasons behind why you're doing something. And it's taking that, going back to that excellence in 360 degrees in 3 dimensions. So it's around that full kind of spherical kind of model, if you like, of making a difference. And externalizing what needs to be done is really noticing all those different artifacts in and around our surroundings, helping to create shifts in perceptions and noticing what we could make a difference to and change so that we can start embodying inclusion into our cultures. I'd like to just pause and ask you a question. So if I was to think about a piece of grass and think about in your own organization, what if the grass represents what does it mean to you as an individual? And it's been fascinating how people think about a lawn or a field. So obviously to the dog, this is an amazing place to play, to meet meet other dogs and have fun, chase balls. Some people look at a big field and go, it's been really nicely mown, it's got lovely straight lines. Other people think it's a great place to sit and socialize. So feel free to add in the chat what a piece of grass means to you. How are we all different? And we had a chat in our family the other week about the lawn. And my son said that I just would say it was green. My husband would say it would count the blades of grass. And actually, when he chipped into the conversation, he said, no, I just think it needs cutting and needs to be mown in nice straight lines. And he enjoys the deep satisfaction that you get from that. So being able to appreciate how we each see and feel and fit into our environment is really important to help us appreciate how everybody experiences the workplace in a different way, and involving people and helping to shape that environment. I see Nicholas is in Australia. He needs trees on the lawn, otherwise you get burned. Yeah, nice. But do you have to water it? That just becomes another burden and a cost, doesn't it, to keep that grass going? It's sometimes just an interesting thought experiment to plant with your colleagues around how we are experiencing the workplace. What would we each want from it? And to some extent, that varies about what our role is in life. So in the education environment, these are 6 fundamental roles that you might have in terms of leading. You may be a departmental faculty leader, you might be a course or curriculum leader, you might be leading on sort of pedagogical research, you might be leading in your own way around championing a particular initiative. We each lead in our own way, and we can lead even when we don't have that title in our for our job description. But we can make a difference in everything we do. We each have agency. We each just live, don't we? And we shape the world by contributing to conversations, activities, but we can also shape the world by challenging the things that we see and come across. And we have agency to tinker and tweak and make a difference. We support people in our daily lives. We can give other people confidence in their contribution. I talked about how we can make a difference in meetings, just a regular everyday meeting by acknowledging people by name. It's so important when people contribute and notice us, because we don't want to get feedback from people. We want to be noticed. We want to feel that we're being useful and making a really good contribution. And how else can we support people? Can we listen more deeply? But in terms of being within engineering, we can bring inclusive design and a global context and global responsibility to both the work that we do and the research that we might be involved in. In terms of teaching, what are the tools that we can have to help create a stronger narrative? I really like using the Cartman's drama triangle about villains, victims and valiant rescuers. And it's not always the person that you think is the rescuer, but again, it's all a matter of perspective. So the engineer going to design schools in Ghana might see themselves as the valiant rescuer of education in a village, and yet they might be seen as the villains who want to impose some sustainable, ecological, low energy building within the local landscape. So they may be the villains wanting to put Western ideologies into the village, whereas actual fact, the village want to see something modern, glass and shiny that inspires them into the new world. But as a tutor as well, or as a teacher or supporter or as a mentor, what else are you doing to support people coming up through the profession? So one of the things that we deliver here at Catalytic is the Engineering Inclusion Forum. And it's got a 4-module syllabus, offering people some fundamental insights into changing the conversation on inclusion and engineering. And we give people tools to shift and understand and help both tutors, but also students appreciate when they're in that dialogue, discussion or debate space. Something we don't tend to think about. And debate, I find, is rarely useful unless it's very carefully leveraged when we're talking around inclusion. And discussion and dialogue, again, shifting that conversation. And the dialogue is having that to and fro and listening mode in your mindset. I don't know about you, but I don't think many people have been taught to listen. Done the active listening about nodding, eye contact. It doesn't work for everybody. Not everybody wants to make eye contact with somebody. And so we're kind of thinking that we really need to be thinking around how we are shifting these conversations and how the global view affects what it is that we do. And also in terms of, and module 4 is really about introducing critical thinking tools into the space and are thinking around polarity management, because very rarely are we working on anything these days which is a simple, clean answer to anything. It's around managing the polarities. And when we think about inclusion and diversity, the more we've been pushing people around doing diversity, the more we've been doing diversity to people, we've been pushing away white male engineers from the whole endeavour that we're engaged in. And we're creating this sort of reversity in a way as we're getting a pullback, and it's causing this pushing back. And we're, rather than getting inclusion, we're creating a much bigger sense of adversity. So it is really reversity of what it is that we're trying to do. So the R.I.S.E methodology is our approach to addressing inclusion in engineering. It's around focusing on what do right and tinkering and tweaking it, monitoring and adjusting it. So just look at the car. You know, if we want our car to go faster, we're going to tweak the aerodynamics, but we're also going to look at the engine's ecosystem. We're going to be looking at sensors to monitor the fuel mix, the air mix, so that we can adjust it and tweak it to get it right. We're going to be looking at improving our braking system. And we want to make sure that we're making things as smooth and as efficient as possible. I'm going to have to update this, aren't I, for a battery car? So what we need to do is shift our approach. We need to have engineers who are more connected with each other. We want to have engineers who've got emotion and empathy, who can really connect with who it is that they're working with on a very different level. We need engineers who've got a greater sense of that global connectivity and global responsibility. There's a new report called, I don't have a copy of it, which is the Global Responsibility of Engineering, which really, I guess we can send a link to you afterwards if it's not there in the chat, to really help you connect with what it is we need to do to tread more lightly on our planet and be more purposeful about and sustainable in the way that we live. It's fundamentally about human-centered engineering. This recognizing the needs of the individual within your organization, within your client base, with your supplier base, about valuing the individual and the contribution that they make, bringing them, naming them, calling them out, celebrating their contributions, looking at the impacts of engineering on individuals in society so that we're valuing what everybody brings, but also thinking around the individuals within a team, within the design team. But also it's about that individual in society as well, and valuing that they're important and they need to be able to make a difference. So let's rise together. Let's collectively make a difference and shift how we're working to build an inclusive and powerful profession. I'm seeing lots of things flying past in the chat, so thank you for the notes, Helen. What I'd love to know is what is one thing that you've learned from what I've talked about? Not many of us here, but please put them in the chat or unmute and share it. Sharon loves the lawn with beautiful patterns mown into it, the craftsmanship, but loves oh, you love the smell of newly mown grass. Ah, that just makes me sneeze. Amelia's, we just iterated to me the issues we've been trying to land inclusion and that it's just not us. Lots of useful food for thought. No, you're very welcome. I love helping people think and connect. Is there any particular element of thought that helps people to take away? Does R.I.S.E as a methodology and that rationalize, is that something that people haven't connected with? Sharon hadn't recognised the 16% of women in engineering was at university, and it's not industry. Indeed, it's not an industry. Although some data will look at women working within engineering, and that typically includes procurement, but can also, in cases, include administration. Please do stay connected with us, and if you want to find time to have a chat, that would be lovely. It's been great. Thank you very much for joining us. Do you want to stop recording, Hayley?